That 90s show's back, and it is not better than ever. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it's significantly worse. While I was a fan of the first season, I didn't think it always worked as well in execution as it did in concept. Regardless, it still had its moments and provided what I believed was a promising start to a show. Comparatively, this season is unfortunately underwhelming. Part 2 picks up right where Part 1 left off, which is actually a part of the problem. Considering that so much time has passed between seasons, not just here in the real world, but also in the fictional one that we're talking about as well, what with Season 1 ending with the season, and Season 2 starting with that same season the following year, it's strange to see these characters act like the events from that previous part are still pressing issues. When I was that age, summers felt like they were a lifetime apart. I would also imagine that Leia kept in touch with all of her friends during that time period, despite the distance. As a matter of fact, the show mentions that she has. So having the cliffhanger the show closed things off on play such a major factor here seems a little bit impractical. The first finale saw Leia and Jay break things off briefly, and almost ended with her kissing his best friend and her best friend's brother, Nate. Further complicating matters is the fact that Nate is also dating Leia's other friend, Nikki. So this is just all kinds of bad decisions. So when Leia returns to Point Place the next summer, hijinks ensues, and she accidentally confesses to this act on the radio, leading to a confrontation between the four that is all too quickly moved on from. While this moment is moved past in favor of the group remaining friends sans tension, it does inevitably lead to Nate breaking things off with Nikki, in front of their group of friends, during a smoke circle. That's just gotta be some kind of party foul. But this breakup is pretty confusing in practice. If the goal was to just stir up some drama, then it fails because it's too quick to return to the status quo. As opposed to allowing tension to boil up and dwell throughout this season, they just kind of wrap up all the loose ends in the first 2 episodes. Not to mention that despite the 2 being broken up, they continue to hook up after the fact. Now, if the goal was to follow the formula of the first show with Jackie and Kelso, well then it fails on that front as well. In the Parent series about most of these characters' parents, Jackie and Kelso broke up all the time. It was kind of their thing, but this was usually done for comedic effect. Other times it would be done to drive home a narrative and set up an episode story. Here, it just sort of happens. And since the 2 are quick to get back together despite not actually getting back together, it sort of undercuts any attempt of tension that the show might have been going for. And since it's so hard to try to dictate what it was they were trying to do, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I don't think that they did it. Even though Nate and Nikki very evidently did. That 90s show feels like it's taking cues from that 70s show, but it's not understanding the context of these cues. Nate and Nikki are said to have an unhealthy relationship, but the show doesn't showcase that. It just mentions that they've been fighting a lot. This is That 90s Show, not That 90s Tell. You show your audience what it is you're trying to get them to invest in. You don't just mention it and assume that it was heard and felt. And that's not a problem that's exclusive to this specific relationship. A lot of this season seems to just happen off screen. Ozzie and his long-distance boyfriend break up in between shots. The other couples this season shows don't fare all that much better. Leia and Jay's relationship is fine, I guess. There just isn't really a whole lot going on with them this season. Their relationship gets very little development. Whereas the last season it felt like Leia was progressing as a person, it now feels like she's not really doing much of anything. I don't dislike the pairing, I just dislike that there's nothing the writers can think to do with them. Because these 2 could be a lot of fun. Their contrasting personalities work against each other, and despite their differences, they're not immune to playing into each other's immaturity. Leia is a hopeless romantic, and Jay Kelso is a hopeless idiot. So you can see how they find some common ground. Gwen this season starts dating an Abercrombie & Fitch model, named Cole, showing that sometimes opposites really do attract. But I don't know what else I could possibly say about them. They're different, but they date is pretty much the whole dynamic here. I wouldn't say that this was bad, but I can't say more than this was. Ozzie once again is the one left out. Not given a whole lot to do, not given any major plot points, and while I've stated that the character can be fun and funny, it can also be a little too over the top for its own good sometimes. On occasion taking away from moments as opposed to adding to them. This season they tried to give him an emotional moment, but it falls flat. There's little investment in this character because the show hasn't made him important. Add on to it that we're supposed to feel sorry for him for being broken up with by someone who never appears on camera. As per usual, Red and Kitty are the highlight of this show. They're still just as great as they've ever been, even when the show isn't always providing them the greatest material. I will admit, a lot of the time it seems like they're retreading old ground, which makes sense as we're talking about that 90s show. Making moments with previously established moments is all well and good. Sometimes it's good to sequelize and follow up on the former. Like when Red has a heart attack after hearing that his granddaughter and her boyfriend are ready to take things to the next level. That's not entirely unlike when he had a heart attack after hearing that Lori married Fez in that 70s show. See, now that makes sense. That's a pattern that's applicable to real life. Heart problems are usually lifelong and continual, not just a one and done. That's completely fair play and accurate to reality. But having Ozzie make Kitty think that there's cause for concern in her marriage, after having done a very similar story beat on that 70s show multiple times, just feels like a been there, done that. Like I said, regardless of what it is that they're made to do, seeing these two work with each other again still makes my day. They are worth the watch even in the worst episode. That being said, there are some noticeable changes made to certain characters. Jay probably getting the most amount of growth. And I'm not just talking about his hair, as he's now actively attempting to be a better person. And you get the feeling that he's not all that bad of a guy. He's just an immature dude who didn't get it. And to be fair to him, he doesn't get most things. It also now feels like they're having the character otherwise go full Kelso. He's somehow gotten dumber since the first season, but it's actually made the character that much more endearing. This change creates a little bit more of a comparison between he and Leia, as the two now feel equally oblivious, but in different ways. In terms of that 70s show alum, there's a lot less Easter eggs for fans of the first. Deeply departed characters are mentioned in passing by name, which was nice to hear.
I'm her grandpa, too. Mitch swore to me.
In her high school days, my daughter Lori was also very social.
Small inclusions like this feel proper to the story itself, and also kind of reiterates that those actors are gone but not forgotten. I think it's a touching little tribute to acknowledge their contributions to the series. Leia's other grandfather, Bob, had a bit part in the first season, showing up for an episode. But this time around, he's brought back to play a reoccurring role, as he's moved into the house across the street from the Foremans. His inclusion, or more accurately, re-inclusion, is certainly a welcome one. It feels like his relationship with Red picks right back up where it left off, and they didn't skip a beat. The one major difference is that Bob now stands up for himself more. While this is a change, it doesn't feel like a forced one, like back in Season 8 when they tried something like this the first time around. This feels much more authentic. It's a slight and subtle change, but a purposeful one. And after looking into the matter, those behind the scenes specifically stated that they wanted to ground this character and make him more into a real person rather than a constant punchline. That's not to say that he's still not on occasion the butt of the joke, or the one making butt jokes. It just means additionally that now he could be serious and play into more storylines than he could previously. Seth Green comes back as an adult Mitch, who has somehow both changed a whole lot, but also stayed the same. He's still just as disgruntled as he ever was, if not more so, and he still has that same hatred and jealousy of Eric Foreman, lashing out upon hearing Leia's last name and going on a tangent about how her father stole her mother from him, which, if you're a fan of the original series, you know that's not the case. Mitch is now the easily agitated manager of a Hot Topic. It's not the future I would have foreseen for this character, but it feels like a very fitting one nonetheless. Leo, of course, makes his obligatory cameo at the end of an episode, somehow showing up to a party that he mistakes for his own retirement party. He eventually reveals that he's leaving his business up to his never-before-mentioned son, who we'll get into in just a moment. Strangely enough, actor Wayne Knight makes an appearance as Red's hospital roommate, Bruce. Now, Knight previously appeared in that 70s show, but he was acting as an angel showing Eric a world without him. But the most interesting return may just be Will Forte, who never appeared on screen on that 70s show, but acted as a writer and producer for the show. Knowing that after having read his name a million times in the closing credits, it was nice to actually see him make an appearance. He's without a doubt the most interesting new character the show introduces, but unfortunately, I get the feeling that he's a one and done. Will plays Kiefer, a spiritual scam artist who tricks Kitty into buying his bullshit. he's inevitably shown to be a coke-loving sleazebag who is just making it up as he goes along, while feigning enlightenment. So there are still some familiar faces, but there are some obvious ones missing. Eric is written off as having not taken the trip due to illness. Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis didn't return to their roles this season. It feels a little weird not seeing their characters despite Jay being a main character, but then I think back to that 70s show and I ask myself how often I saw Jackie or Kelso's parents. And once I got the answer for that, it felt a lot more justified. Jackie's father is really only seen in 3 episodes of the show, and all of those appearances take place in the first season. Jackie's mother appears for 4 episodes throughout the show, only being given attention for a short story arc that saw Brooke Shields play the part. Kelso's father only made 1 appearance, and once again that was in the first season, while Kelso's mother is never seen. So to be fair, these 2 could never show back up again, and honestly it's looking like they probably won't, and it'd still make just about as much sense as anything else. But what makes much less sense is the loss of Fez. Fez appeared on 3 occasions in the first season, and was sort of set up to play a bigger part in the show in the future. He acted as Sherry's boyfriend, and it was clear that this wasn't meant to be a fling, but instead a long-term thing. For whatever reason, now he's MIA, and he's never seen and never mentioned. And speaking of Sherry, her role has definitely been diminished. Appearing in 5 episodes of the original 10, she goes down to appearing in 3 episodes out of 8, and playing a far less important part of this show this time around, which is a real shame, because she was one of the more fun new additions of last season. The only thing of note she does here is Matt Rife, who is playing a germaphobe pilot for some reason. I'm not going to complain too much about this, because these are the types of background characters they would have set up in the last show. On the topic of the old gang, the only original to make a comeback in cameo form is Laura Prepon as Donna, and she's just really killing it. She doesn't have as much screen time this time around, but whatever time we have with her is usually time well spent. She's very supportive of her daughter, but she's also not a sucker. She's super involved in her kid's life, but stops short of being overbearing. Does she overstep sometimes? Sure, but no more than any other parent has, and a lot less than most parents of their decade did. While she supports her daughter's decisions and compliments her on coming to the right resolution, in this case choosing to not steal the tape in which Nate confesses to Nikki about their almost kiss, Donna commends her for her decision and still erases the tape on her behalf in order to protect her daughter. It's a little gesture that says a lot. That being said, every nod to the past isn't exactly well received. There are plenty of times where the show contradicts its own continuity. Red makes mention that Bob needs a haircut, but it's pretty well documented that Bob wears a toupee. Red also talks about marrying Kitty because they paid more in the army for family men, when Red actually met Kitty when he was already enrolled. There's some new inclusions in this new installment, with the season ending with Leo's son and his buddy showing up to Point Place, and having those characters be played by Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes, who are in their full Jay and Silent Bob getup, even though this show already made a point to mention Clerks and Kevin Smith by name in the first season.
I love Clerks. Kevin Smith, right?
Clerks, starring Kevin Smith. I'll take a slice of that.
It seems like a strange choice that was made in an effort to write Leo off and find a modern replacement. And you know what? That kinda checks out. I don't mean to overuse this word when talking about the show, but everything about it just feels inconsequential. Arcs begin and end in the same episode. Sometimes it feels like the story's introducing a new character who will have longevity in the series, but in most cases they're just one-off plot players. While the first season seemed to want to develop the characters a little more, this season decided that they were very comfortable with where they are, with almost nobody attached to the show having any kind of evolution as a character. This is going to seem like a weird complaint, but I think it's a valid and somewhat distracting one. The jokes seem to happen at the expense of the moments themselves. Like, the comedy's trying to rear its head in places that it doesn't make sense, and in other places where jokes should happen naturally, it feels like they're incredibly forced for some reason. A lot of the time, Leia's daydreams go awry, like having Lisa Loeb interrupt Leia's remaking of her music video, or having Jay eat Doritos in the middle of her imagining them as Romeo and Juliet. The joke should be the fantasy itself, as opposed to trying to make bad jokes within that fantasy sequence. More accurately, the joke should be about Leia's idea of romance, considering that she has such little life experience. not someone interrupting a scene from a famous movie to eat a chip. You miss the obvious joke in an effort to shoehorn in a bad one. And realistically, if these are her fantasies, you would think that they would go as planned. But hey, at least the laugh track seems to be having a good time, as it can't even catch its proverbial breath from how often it's played. That 70s show had a laugh track, and it was never nearly this distracting. I don't think it helps matters that the jokes are rapid fire, and more often than not, it feels like they're shooting blanks. They don't exactly land the punchline, and sometimes it's questionable what the punchline even was supposed to be to begin with. The acting is still hit or miss. And there's plenty of times where it hits, but when it misses by a large margin. Probably not helped by the fact that the actors have to take a pause after every sentence for imaginary laughter, but it wouldn't be award-winning had they not had to do that anyway. Some of the time it feels like Disney Channel acting, and that feels even more weird when it's juxtaposed with raunchy humor and sex jokes. The time period references are all over this show, and it gets excessive very quickly. Their only place on this show seems to be in an effort to remind the audience when this takes place. They could be fun some of the time, but most of the time they're not. And I think ultimately this series suffers from the same problem that 80s show suffered from, and that's not having the same substance as its predecessor. It wasn't the decade that made that first show so successful, it was the characters. Now I will say, to the season's credit, it did begin to grow on me more with each passing episode, but by the end of it, it's a pretty bad first half with an alright second, which I don't think is a passing grade. It still isn't exactly stellar. This season wasn't unbearable, but it was a lot less entertaining and enjoyable than the first one. I don't hate it, but I'm finding it hard to like it. Season 2 is tolerable, but it doesn't exactly make any kind of impression, good or bad. I'm actually currently working on a retrospective of That 70s Show, and it's taking me so long because of how often I have to pause to take notes. There's just so much to talk about it, and I'm only on the first season of that show. Now, in comparison, I watched this season 3 times in a row in order to find things to talk about. I really want to like this series. And sometimes I do, but it feels like a lot of its good qualities are lost in a seemingly endless sea of mediocrity. I don't want to see it end, as I think that there's some merit to it. I want to see someone flesh these characters out, accentuate the positives, and negate the negatives. It's not an impossible task. You have a talented cast, you have a good idea of who these characters are. Now, if you could just let the audience in on it, you might have something here. That being said, I can't imagine, if changes aren't made soon, that the show will make it past its already guaranteed 3rd season. And that was That 90s Show Part 2. If you liked this video and you'd like to see my That 70s Show retrospective, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
The 70s had arrived.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.